Atito, Atira Reneltta Arluk. I am the Director of Indigenous Arts at Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. I'm originally from the Northwest Territories. My mother is Dene Sustlene and Cree, and my father's Inuvialuit Gudjen. So I'm Dene, Cree, and Inuvialuit from up north. I've been here at Banff Centre for about 4 years now, and I'm pretty excited to offer our new programming that we're doing, which is called Decolonizing the Narrative Conversation Sessions. And so we're going to be offering 7 speakers over 7 months to talk with artists, Indigenous artists, art leaders across the country that are using a process of engaging in their art discipline, yet offering a decolonization of that. And so I'm very excited, little nervous. So I'm very excited to be joining you from Treaty 6 territory here in Edmonton, Alberta. And our first guest today is Kevin Loring. So Kevin Loring hails from, when we talk about Indigenous theatre in the last 20 years in Canada, Kevin Loring's name and work is largely part of that conversation. He is Ikhlaqplaqma from Lytton First Nation in British Columbia, and his arts roots run deep, not only in his home community, but in Vancouver and nationally as well. A graduate of Studio 58, a highly reputable acting program, Kevin Loring is an accomplished actor, playwright, director, and artistic director of Savage Society, a not-profit charity dedicated to telling Indigenous stories. Savage Society was created in 2004 as an ad hoc organization, so its members could produce their own stories as practicing Indigenous theater and film artists. Savage Society was incorporated in 2013 with Kevin Loring as the artistic director. Based in Vancouver and New Westminster, Savage Society operates on unceded Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Kakite, and Squamish territory. In reference to the word savage, which can have a negative connotation to it, their website quotes, "To show our historical and personal struggles as human struggles, by acknowledging our shared histories, challenging stereotypes, by sharing our hearts, minds, and spirits through our craft, to expose the stereotype as a construct of ignorance, to show that behind the social facade, we are all savages. We are all people in nature." And this response lends itself well to Loring's work as an artist and now arts leader. A versatile artistic leader, Loring has served as a co-curator of the Talking Stick Festival, founded by Margot Kane in Vancouver, as artist in residence at the Vancouver Playhouse Theatre, as artistic director of Savage Society, and as a documentary producer, writer, and co-host of Canyon War, The Untold Story. Now, Canyon War is about the Fraser River gold rush, which saw some 32,000 gold seekers flood into the Fraser Valley, culminating in the Fraser River War. Many lives were lost until peace was finally achieved in Lytton by Henry Snyder and Chief Spintlam, through which Kevin Loring is a descendant. Kevin's work has deep connection to community for community. As a project leader, creator, and director of the Songs of the Land project in Lytton First Nation, Loring created the Songs of the Land project in 2012 in partnership with 5 separate community organizations. The project explores 100-year-old audio recordings and the creation stories of the Ikhlaqplaqmuk. Loring has written several new plays based on this work, with an ensemble of professional Indigenous artists and community members. And these include Battle of the Birds, about domestic violence and power abuse, The Council of Spider, Ant, and Fly, about the introduction of death into the universe, and The Boy Who Was Abandoned, about youth abandonment and elder neglect. His work expands into the larger Indigenous landscape. Kevin has a long history at the National Arts Centre. As well as performing in numerous productions there prior, he was a company member of the NAC's English Theatre Acting Company and was the playwright in residence there in 2010. In 2017, he became the first artistic director of Indigenous theatre at the National Arts Centre of Canada. The inaugural takeover of the NAC lasted 2.5 weeks, starting September 11th to 29th in 2019, under the name of Mushkamo, located on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. Mushkamo, pronounced Mushkamo, is an Algonquin word gifted to the NAC by elders from the nearby community of Kitiganzibi, meaning the act of appearing out of water, inviting others to bear witness to its arrival. A unique Indigenous arts and community festival featuring all Indigenous programming in all of the NAC performance and public spaces, and the offerings of Mushkamo reflected and celebrated Indigenous women's resilience, strength, and beauty, in which most works written and created by women. To quote the final report, which Mushkamo was massive. The festival featured 111 events, 332 participants, including performers, elders, creators, directors, panelists, facilitators, designers, and others. There were concerts, there were theater productions, dance performances, artist talkbacks, workshops, classes, culinary arts, visual arts, free public programming, and family-friendly activities for the national and international artists that gathered from everywhere to be there, including myself, producers and presenters to celebrate and partake in. And all that began with a 3-kilometer canoe journey down Rideau Canal. As you can imagine, Kevin is a recipient of many awards and accolades, most notably the 2009 Governor General's Literary Award for his play Where the Blood Mixes, which has been performed in both English and French. And he's received a Governor General's Performing Arts Mentorship Award. He was a GG Literary Award finalist for his play Thanks for Giving in 2018. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today, Masicho Kuyanik, and let's welcome Kevin Loring.
Homer, Kevin Loring Hanshquest. I am coming to you from the unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe in Ottawa, Ontario. And I am joined today by my elder Sharon Spinks from the Lytton First Nation, and my bro and friend and collaborator Ronnie Dean Harris to talk to you about some really wonderful, important work that we've been doing over the last number of years, involving wax cylinder recordings from 100 years ago of Ntlakatmuk singers and storytellers, and our creation stories, the stories that are the foundational stories that include our cosmologies and our laws, and many of our wonderful characters from our history and our culture as Ntlakatmuk people. Cookstum. Sharon just wanted to start us off with a really beautiful invocation of nature to get us started off in a good way. Sharon, did you want to share that with us?
Okay, Homer. To Hoot the wish to come Kindaya to DJ Laxazot. To la go and la wish to come Kindaya to DJ Laxazot. At la Takam da me moy, Takam da Jigap, Kindaya to DJ Laxazot. At Takam da Shialagan and Mushalagan. Kindaya to DJ Laxazot. At Takam da Halauk Anak is constant night. Stemtedax honey, stemtedax genocht, kindea do DJ laxazot. Homer. From the river and all living things, we humbly ask, help us so that we can be strong today. And from the river to the highest mountain, we humbly ask, help us so that we can be strong today. And the 2-legged animals and the 4-legged animals, help us so that we can be strong today. And all the grass and all Mother Earth, help us so that we can be strong today. And the sacred eagle that flies over us and watches us and takes us away from sickness, help us so that we can be strong today. Homer, Cooksjam, Homer.
Cooksjam. Thank you so much for that, Sharon. Maybe I'll just get us, I'll get you to introduce yourselves and to talk about where you're from and all of that. So I'll start off with Ronnie.
Hi everyone, Ronnie Dean Harris, Malithuk and Squash, Tal Squee. My name is Ronnie Dean Harris. My ancestral name is Malithuk. That name comes from Chief James of Yale. My family's come from also Inglekapuk territories, from Spuzzum, but also Stalo, Litwat territories as well. My formative arts practice was in hip hop mostly, mostly till I met Kevin Loring and started kind of embarking into some different works. So now my position is Indigenous Cultural Development Director at the Massey Theatre, using research and design to sort of activate some cultural and historical understanding to the city of New West. And I'm happy to be here, happy to be amongst you guys as well.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Thanks, Ronnie. And Sharon, you want to give yourself a little introduction for our watchers?
Okay, Homer, Sharon and Squest and Sharon Spinks. I'm an Tlagapmuk elder from Lytton, British Columbia, and I have been in training and in the helping field for so long, I can't count the years I've been in the helping field. But the other thing that I've done is I've kept my language, and now I'm involved with helping out with plays and skits with Kevin Loring, and thoroughly enjoyed anytime I'm working with Kevin. And also I'm involved with the K4, K5 immersion in Stein Valley School, and going on the third year. So it's been challenging because I can't keep up with the K4 and K5 when they run away on me. But I'm also involved with helping. I've never stopped helping residential school survivors overcome and look for a new future for themselves. And it's a difficult work, but it can be done and has been done. And I commend all the residential school survivors that have found a new path for themselves. And that is one of the things that I see it as in the future. We need to step away from things that are holding us back. And that is negativism on a person. It doesn't belong to us because we were born perfect. We were born without malice. We were born without indecisions. And we need to grab that towards us and then move from there. This is what I've seen many residential school survivors do. They've turned their life around because of the freedom. It is a freedom from all the negativism that is infiltrated into us. And when once we get rid of that, the freedom, and I felt it myself, but I've been working 40 years to get rid of that and look at the future. And the future is beautiful. Okay, Homer, Kuksjam, Homer.
That was a really great introduction. That was really powerful. Thanks for that, Sharon. Yeah, I just want to say for folks who don't know who I am, I'm an actor and a playwright. I'm in Tlakatmuk, like my bro Ronnie there and Sharon. I come from the same community that Sharon is from. I come from Lytton, and I'm proud of that, of where I come from. I was born and raised there, and I have so much family there. And Sharon is also part of my family there as well. And we are really proud, strong people, and have a long history of being proud and strong people in the Fraser Canyon, in that area there. My work as a playwright, I wrote a play about residential school survivors called Where the Blood Mixes, that won the Governor General's Award in 2009 and has toured the country a few times. And I've written other plays as well. And one of the projects that I brought to the community is this play creation project that we call Songs of the Land, that is about taking our creation stories that have been recorded by various people over the years, ethnographers in particular, and translated sort of like in a sort of Cole's Notes version into these sort of short understandings of what these great big epic stories once were. And so what we've been doing out of this project has been is taking those stories and turning them into plays, and typically plays with music. So I've been been writing original songs alongside like with myself and Sandy Schofield, and in the early days of the project with Renai Morso as well. Other Indigenous professional artists, and what we do is we create these stories by bringing in a team of professional artists, and we've built an ensemble of community members. Sharon is one of those community members who's become a real integral part of that group, and it's really grown over the years. It started off as really just a small little sort of idea that has really become kind of the central practice of Savage Society. This, Savage Society is a company that I founded really to sort of create a platform for myself in the early days, just to get my work up onto the stage. And this project was one of the projects that I started with the company. And this project is now the Songs of the Land project has grown to be sort of the central sort of thing that we do every year. Of course, interrupted by the pandemic, but we're still planning for when we can get back together and join everybody in the community hall again, and do the really fun work that we've been doing for the last, since 2013. But really the project started in the very beginning with the first Words of Our Chiefs production that we did at Cook's Ferry in 2010. I was commissioned by the Cook's Ferry First Nation in Spence's Bridge to present something to honor the 100th anniversary of the Laurier Memorial. And the Laurier Memorial was a petition that was put forward by the Allied Interior Tribes of British Columbia in 1910 to Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who is on a campaign sort of train trip across the country trying to get support for re-election to be the Prime Minister. And the chiefs of the interior tribes, the Allied Interior Tribes, Ntlakatmuk, Secwepemc, and Syilx, and a number of other nations gathered in Spence's Bridge and drafted this petition to Laurier to honor the inherent rights of the Indigenous people of British Columbia. And they presented that to Laurier when he stopped on his campaign trip in Kamloops. And the document that came out of that, which was apparently transcribed by James Tate, who was an ethnographer who recorded many of the wax cylinder recordings that we use in our project, and did a lot of the field notes that we reference as source material for a lot of the cultural work that we do, just as a reference to check with our own understandings of what that cultural material is. And so that was the first time we really did that kind of work in community, presented a play, and it sort of gave me this idea of really going further with that and exploring some of the other works that Tate had transcribed over the years, and exploring those creation stories and looking at those wax cylinder recordings that he had made as a means of developing new plays that we could do in the community with the community. And so I really began on a journey of exploring what that would be like and what that would require. And the first thing that came to my mind was, well, we need the community to be involved. And we need the community to need to hear what the community feels about us using this material. Our creation stories, our spectacle stories, and these wax cylinder recordings. And so came up with the idea of hosting a week-long gathering in Lytton where we feasted and we invited the community in to have a real fulsome conversation about this material. So about the wax cylinder recordings of our people singing songs. Some of them are like medicine songs, others are like social songs. There's the whole range, right? But to have a real fulsome conversation about what the community felt was important, whether or not we should even be doing this work. That was the first question I put forward to the community, was whether or not we should even be engaging in this work and touching these materials and using them in this way. And we had Jimmy Tudlikin, your cousin there, Sharon, and many of the other cultural experts of our nation. Really, we had 4 dialects of the Ntlaka'pamixt'siin language represented in the language speakers in that gathering. We had leadership from tribal and many of the chiefs from the Ntlaka'pamix Nation showed up throughout that week. And at the end of it all, we shared our findings with the community, and we feasted again. And we even went to Stein, which is our spiritual the spiritual heart of the Ntlaka'pamix Nation, and we did a song sharing and storytelling gathering down on the banks of the Stein River. So I was just curious what your guys' thoughts are, or memories of, or things that sort of stick out in your mind from that time when we were engaging in that work. At the time, I didn't really know what I was doing, to be totally honest. I was like, I have this idea. I don't really know how to go about doing it. So I thought, well, we would take it to the community and ask what they thought. And they could very well have told me, no. What do you think you're doing, Lauren? So I'm just curious what your recollection of that time was like when we were doing that week-long symposium.
I mean, my involvement was mostly technical at first. Just using software to clean up these wax cylinder recordings. So it was the first time I'd heard of them, but was instantly very interested in these recordings and what they meant, which was hard to interpret because we didn't have a lot of info about them back then. It was just a bunch of recordings in 700 to 800 megabyte files, just in piles, some sped up, some slowed down, very staticky. So, in some of the songs, they would have these intros like, oh, this is a Sweat Lodge song, Crane song, but some of them you wouldn't have an interpretation. So I remember, I think it was awesome because in the magnitude of that work, I did at that time, I didn't know what was happening really. I was just there to participate in a new community that I hadn't spent a lot of time in, with whom I now understand to be really important elders of the Ntlaka'pamux consciousness. So I was, been super honored to be like, oh, I was sat beside these people and got to witness conversations. I remember there was an hour-long conversation about one syllable and how that one syllable could change the entire consciousness of the conversation. So really important language stuff. And I think some really important conversations that need to be had. And I think from my understanding now, need to be had almost on a yearly basis or a 4-year basis of what do we do with digital recordings and what is the pathway of how we manage, disseminate, and activate the not just song recordings, but archival materials and stuff that's on paper. Not just activate it in the way that we can understand it, but activate it into communities. So because, you can throw an essay at somebody and be like, hey, there's stuff about our grandpa in here. And they'll just be like, okay. Right. But if you can disseminate it and you can, nowadays, if you can make it into a podcast or a meme or something like that, people are going to be interested and want a new pathway into it. And unfortunately, because of pop culture, that's kind of how we think. So as artists, right, that it gets me thinking well, how do we get this from a circle of elders to the young people? Right. Yeah. So that's, for me, it's kind of been created another arc of work in my life from that point there, from having elders say, well, we want to understand these recordings more. We want to understand what they're about. We want them separated. We want to be able to access them in a different way. Kind of, for me, it was as a media artist, as a creator in media, it kind of got my gears spinning. Well, what can I contribute to this? And there was a lot of things. And so that's kind of been the study, the slate of this work now is sort of this labor of love of accessing all the files, separating them, labeling them, cataloging them, indexing them, with connected materials so that we can interpret them. And then so that we can have the next generation who comes along, these wax cylinders, go, oh, look at this, and have a critical mass of materials that they can reinterpret them like we're doing. So, you know, as these stories get passed along to generations, there are new interpretations, there's new inflections. And I think the more we can give our young people to make a definite, a stronger interpretation of the messages that were left in there, I think it's going to be an awesome feature for arts and creation. So
Yeah.
some of the stuff that I've gotten from all that.
Yeah, I know, like we've known each other for about 20 years, longer maybe, Ronnie. And when I first met you, I just knew you as you were like your Stolo roots. But then during the course of this project, we realized that you're in Lakatmuk, like your family's from Spuzum.
Yeah, I mean, you know, displacement wise, you know, during the gold rush, our Spuzum family was, you know, pushed out of Spuzum, a lot of us, and through displacement, we ended up in Seabird Island. And so you grew up in the Stalo boundary, and I was like, I'm Stalo, right? You when you're young, you kind of take on the identification that's given you, I guess, geographically. So it was interesting that in my 20s I had to find out that I'm Inklakatmuk. It took me a couple of years just to learn how to say Inklakatmuk, let alone start to try to understand the cultural nuances of it. And so, but it started to make a lot of sense, you know what I mean? Like language wise, I was like, oh, that's what my grandma, that's how I know these words, right? But in a Stalo geographic range. And so it's been an awesome journey of just sort of discovering Inklakatmuk culture and doing my best to sort of in the wake of the research, just organize all this stuff so that whoever finds it after me is going to be like, boom, right? And so, and I think that's part of what we're all doing, is that in our path of resurging and revitalizing our own bundles of culture, it's like we meet up with other people doing that work, and we organize the bigger bundle together so that we know where we're at. So it's an awesome conversation to be a part of. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things about the stories that I've learned, I mean, off the top, it was amazing to learn that there were these archival materials that we could hear our ancestors and access songs from antiquity. But connected to that material is the ethnographic materials of James Tate and the other, you know, ethnographers of the time, recording like this epic cosmology of our ancestors, full of stories, full of symbol, full of syntax, and connected to land, connected to culture, cosmology, and a deeper knowledge than is given credit to by Western academics. So I think for me is like being able to access these accounts of these stories so that we can interpret the symbols back into the language and the syntax of it, so that we can sort of understand the same way that people are able to go, oh, in Leviticus, blah, 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 right? Or, oh, and this Job said this, and they'll go back to the Quran or to their ancient scripture and be able to anecdote and go, oh, they made this decision, so this is a guidance to our values. Or even the same way that pop culture, you can go, hey, on The Simpsons, remember when he did this? It's like this. We should be able to do that with Coyote stories. We should be able to do that with the stories of you know, Meadowlark and of Beaver. And so this work for me has become part of that. How do we get these stories back into, if we can't do it in oral culture, we have to gather it somewhere so people can start to activate it and it becomes a process. So becoming oral culture is the aspiration. For me, this work of, here's a story, let's tell it. What do you notice about it? What values do you think have to be in it? What are our values now to be interpreted into the story? So, you know, and now the work that I've kind of got into is like back down to base level of just creating coloring sheets that include some of these stories and symbols and language so that the kids can understand it. And that's what's important. I spent my time writing rap for other rappers and like that only nerd rappers would ever understand. So now finding these cultural materials and going, well, you can create something that other artists are going to go, oh, that's awesome, but it has to reverberate from the youngest person in the room to the oldest person in the room. And I think that was the value and the brilliance of our ancestors, and the way they put these stories together, the way they put them and organize them, that activates that memory in us. So when we hear them, we're like, yeah, yeah. And then one of the best parts about doing those stories, like Battle of the Birds, because we did it first, was hearing some of the people going, oh no, it's different this way, or yeah, I remember that part. Oh no, I remember it this way. And there's no one way about these stories. All the accounts are right, because all the interpretations include all the values that the person who's passing it forward has in it. So, you know, and this connects to like the work that, you know, the generations before us did, but also like the gatherings our people used to have before contact, where in the same way, sun ceremonies and winter ceremonies in the lodge is taking 4 days to tell a story, you know? And so, yeah, it for me, it's exciting work. And I think it's something that I hope that other people get involved in and know that they have really like, they have something to offer to it. Right. I think a lot of us like, oh, I don't know. It's like, you know, one little thing that could change this whole story and make it complete. So, you know, it's great to see more and more people. I remember we had to chase people down that first couple of years, but now it's like, you don't have to chase people down. You get to the hall and it's just packed. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's really, I was, you know, the more we've done it, like the first year we did it, I kind of had to coax people to sort of get out up onto the floor and do the work. Now when we gather, it's like, boom, everybody's like on point. And then, I mean, we could begin creating almost on day one now. We have such a shorthand and such a language around the way in which we work. We really have truly created an ensemble. We have our own methodology. We have our own approach. We have our own aesthetic. And we have our own process and how we deal with the work and how we engage with it and how we move it forward. And it's, I mean, every time I'm so proud and blown away by the community and how they respond in the hall. Yeah, and the stories themselves are awesome. Like they're, you know, all of them, they're really wonderful stories. The Boy Who Was Abandoned, which is the story of a boy who's sort of thrown away by his family because he's, in the original story that I remember, is actually because he was lazy. He didn't do any of the work. But the way that we interpreted it is we took him as he was kind of a little shit. He was kind of a pain in the butt, and his family got sick of him being kind of a nuisance. And so they tied him to a tree, and they put pitch in his eyes and blinded him. And the forest helped him. Nature helped him, taught him, and he became humble, and he became useful and skilled and good. Through the training that nature provided him. And even the sun takes pity on him. You know, I always remember Samba being that beautiful sun and the song that he had to sing and all that stuff. And but also the story of Spider, Ant, and Fly, the Council of Spider, Ant, and Fly, which which is the story of how death came to be into the universe. In the spectacular era, everybody was kind of like immortal. And it's the insects, the smallest beings, that decide that death should come into the world, and the consequences of that in the first morning. The first morning rituals come out of that death that has arrived. I always found that a really profound story. All of them are really profound stories. That's the thing, is they sort of have the entire breadth of human experience sort of embedded within them. And even though they can sometimes be silly, especially around, you know, anything dealing with a coyote or stuff, like, you know, sometimes coyote poops and he talks to his poop and has conversations and stuff like that with his own excrement. But they're really profound, deep, amazing stories.
Whoa.
I think what's important that for me, just because I've kind of, really followed and tried to access as many of these stories as possible to understand the scope of them. A lot of this work for us is like, we say revitalization, we say resurgence, but I don't think we have to revitalize it. The vitality is already there. It's just sort of uncovering it. The sheer antiquity of these stories, of some of these stories, is mind-blowing, and it needs further work and interpretation, and people will start to begin how amazing it is. Like some of the stories that we've traced with some narrative from elders like Annie York is like the story of Crane. And that story apparently was told by the ancestors on the top of Mount Baker when it was flooded 12,000 years ago. And so that story goes back pre-Ice Age or whatever, but has been handed down through floods and fires, smallpox 1, 2, residential schools, Stephen Harper, what we're going through right now. And so for me, when this kind of gets hot potatoed into my hands, I can't just go, oh, that's nice. And it's survived the floods. It calls to me to find further interpretation and connection to it, and so that our young people can see themselves in these stories and see how excellent they are. But I think that we as Indigenous people kind of lack the support materials to translate these stories. Because now I have a son, so I think about kids' books all the time, and kids' materials. And what do you see out there all the time? It's pandas, it's giraffes, it's rhinoceroses and elephants. Why don't we have beaver and coyote, mink, and all these animals and characters, so that our young people are seeing these characters, are familiar with them, are learning about their values, so when we step into these stories as adults, we have a different lens to kind of interpret the messages and the syntax that's been handed down to us. And so when I think those things, it just gives me another job of trying to create kids' materials. Hence the coloring books, hence some ideas for kids' stories. And also some of the work now that I'm doing with Auntie Sharon is like taking her requests for materials for language stuff and using some of and just creating materials because they don't exist.
There's so much knowledge contained in those stories. Like even the revelation of, like, we have stories about antelope. There are no antelope in Lytton. There are no antelope in the Fraser Canyon. Where are there antelope? Down in like Colville, over in Montana. And our people, when we know through our stories, used to go and would trade and camp with our relatives in Montana and down in Colville, and trade and intermarry, and like sometimes spend a couple of years down there and then come back with trade goods and trade them back to our people, and then a few years later go back down and in this continuing cycle. Like they're in our in burial sites, they find buffalo skulls and buffalo robes in Lytton, and there's no buffalo anywhere near Lytton. Where are there buffalo? There were buffalo in Montana, and those areas, right? Like, or back in the day, more eastern and more southern, and that relationship, often we're thought of as a people that are static. Like if you're from this band or this reserve or this nation, that somehow in the minds of folks that's the only place that we ever went to. But we traveled and we traded, and we had these extensive trade routes throughout the territories, and not just within our traditional boundaries, but beyond. And we shared and traded resources all throughout the West and into the plains. What are your thoughts or hopes and dreams for the future in terms of this work that we've been engaged with now for over a decade?
How can we interpret what we're teaching here to real life is the only way I can explain it. And it goes right along with what Ronnie is saying, what you're saying. What comes to my mind is if we could develop kind of like a fast moving scenario of young people welcoming us elders back. And that's welcoming us back home. Welcome back home. Because we have been taken away from our parents. We've been taken away from our grandparents who should have been teaching us. But is there a way somehow that we can get the young people in there to be the forefront runners in welcoming us back? And welcome, when they do that, they're welcoming all the culture, the language, the tradition that is with us, but we want to catch up to the young people in their way of talking, in their way of actions, and so that we can combine. That's what's been going through my mind. I would say in the last couple of years, and right after our shows, Kevin, I was thinking of writing up something, and then take it from there and involve the young people so that it becomes their story, but with a legacy of we elders involved in it. But let the young people pick it up from there and let them welcome us back home. To our, if the residential school wasn't there, we would have all been free of hurt and pain and disasters. We would have been working as one to help each other, to help the community, to help the young people. It would have all been there, but it isn't. So you get what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
I want to write something. Yeah.
Yeah. To sort of welcome us back to the way that we were.
Yeah.
Welcome us home to that wholeness that you keep talking about.
Yeah.
Sharon, that oneness. Like I was always fascinated by the Shishkin, the pit house down on all those sites down on like the battlefield.
Yeah.
Which is that same land that the residential school occupied.
Yeah.
Right? Which is like the center of our community, really. When you look at it geographically, it's the best land right across the river from the Stein Valley, which is the center of our spiritual beings.
Yeah.
And to see that the residential school occupied that land, it was no coincidence, right? Like that was deliberate. That's that's the most important lands to us.
It is.
And down on some of those fields, you can see the remnant, and all over the territory, you can see the remnants of these pit houses.
Yeah.
And I used to go around with Chief Nathan Spinks back when I was a student, and he used to show me some things, and he used to talk about how like there used to be one big pit house, and that would be the gathering pit house. That like you would have like a whole bunch of little ones, and then there would be like one big one. And that big pit house, they would do their winter stories, winter ceremonies. And I was always like, well, what is that? Like, what were those ceremonies? What were those stories that were shared in that big pit house? What was that like to be in Tlakapmuk and to have that as a part of your annual part of what you did? I mean, I as a youth, I went on my spirit quests and my solos and did my time up in the mountains and stuff like that. But I was always curious about like what else did we do? Like what were those dances and those ceremonies and those songs that would have been shared in that way, right? Before the residential school came and sort of damaged all of that. And I think in my own way, this project has been a way to try to reach back and to try to find a way forward from those stories.
Yeah.
In the way that I know how to do it as me and who I am in this era, right? And with the background that I have. That's kind of, I had that feeling when we were gathered that first time in the symposium, right? Like that feeling of a gathering to come together to really have a council about this work and really have a discussion, but again, we were doing it in a hall, we weren't doing it in that shishkin, that big gathering pit house.
Yeah.
Ronnie, do you have any thoughts?
For wishes,
Yeah, like future.
yeah. I mean, I hope that we continue to just explore and further understand these stories. And, you know, I think as we keep going, there will be new ways to look at them and share them. I hope that through this work, we'll get past the bashfulness of being Indigenous. Racism and discrimination has made it, and residential school and forced assimilation has made it hard for a lot of us to just feel proud in our own skin and our own bodies. Makes us feel awkward as hell in ceremony and in culture. And that's hard. That's hard to hold your culture and feel awkward doing it just because, you don't know what people are thinking or whatever. So, I hope that we can create that space so people can get over that bashfulness of practicing culture and thinking indigenously and practicing their voice and moving their dancing legs for the first time in generations, maybe. So, I come from, I was lucky enough to grow up with my grandparents, and I got to do ceremony, but my parents didn't. And there's a big separation between us that, they kind of like, what is this you're doing kind of thing, where to me, I feel it, So we have to be able to try to create that dialogue and that space for adults and elders and kids to sort of have that interaction to get over the bashfulness of it, so that we can start to really grow these stories. And that's what's kind of happening, is that, in the relationships that we built with the community and Kakamchin there, not just I think the kinship with the community, but the kinship with the land there as well, going back to Stein there and doing stories that are connected to the lands, singing songs that were sung there generations before, telling stories that our ancestors told in those spaces, I think is a huge part of our interconnection with our ancestry and our interconnection with the collective consciousness of who Inklakapuk people are. And it's new and it's different. And a lot of the times when things are new or different, our people don't accept it. But they've accepted what we've been doing. And I think it's touched people's hearts in a good way. And that's the only way you can do it. And by bringing elders and bringing kids together, I think that's got to be a huge part of the model. And so, from Jump Street, from day one of this work, it's changed the path of my career and the path of the passion work that I do. So yeah, I mean, I hope that we can get past this pandemic part and make sure community health is always at utmost, but I can't wait till we can, continue to build and continue to, as these kids get older, man, Ethan's going to start talking soon, you know what I mean? And he's going to have ideas, and that's where the power is going to come from, is when these kids who've been growing up with these stories go, no, it should be this way. Oh, that's when I'm going to put my hands up. I'm going to be like, all right, we're right where we should be. So, yeah.
I think you brought up a couple of really good points there, Ronnie. But talking about, I want to give you a quick example. I did a workshop at Stein Valley at the Asking Rock, and I went ahead and I yammied, like my culture says that if you're going to do, if you're going to help people, you pray for 4 days. So I did that, and I did the workshop at the Asking Rock, and we have a little picnic area there. So traditionally, everybody says their own prayers when they come into the grounds. And so I ask the mountains to help everyone that comes to the workshop, to help them to hear and to share and to listen to what is being shared among all of us. Like I always do in the workshop, but I was part of the group. So when we left, I told everybody that I'm going to pray again to the mountains and ask them to give us back our voices. That was part of our tradition, is that we ask Mother Nature, we're going to be loud, we're going to be laughing, and we're going to be joyous for a couple of hours, and then I go back and I said, I'm going to pray that the mountains give us back our voices. But in doing that, when we walk away, we are leaving behind all the hurt and pain and sorrow that any one of us may have experienced. And that was huge, because it's not something that you can see or feel. It's there. Our ancestors are with us all the time, and they're nodding their heads. Jinwan, Jinwan, you're doing it right. You're doing good. Jinwan. So and what Ronnie is saying is beautiful, because if we can interpret that or add it on to what you're doing already technically, I think we will hit the nail on the head with the community, with the youth, and with everyone. And to for loss of how to explain it, drag in Uncle Dakey and Auntie Jean and continue with the work that we're doing. It's on the side, but it's totally, it's whole. And that brings me to just finish with what Kevin was saying about the longhouse. That again is it's so hard to find the English words for and Tlakapmchin. It is.
Say it in Tlakapmchin, and then.
Yeah. Takam na yeah, shko stakam. They have a good heart, they have a good feeling. There is no sorrow when they have community meetings, and that is what is missing in so many aspects of people's lives. It's sorrow that pokes holes into our wholeness. We need to get back to that wholeness, where we don't feel guilty about anything that we might have accidentally done or did it on purpose. It is that coming back to that pure wholeness, and that is scary for so many people. And what Uncle Nathan was saying about the pit houses and the gathering, that people, they come in as one, and they share with each other, they help each other. And we Tlakapm people are humorous people. And I remember my elders, I don't know, I guess I was 4 or 5 years old, and visitors would come in, and us children would be put on mattresses on the floor, and then the elders would talk well into the nighttime, and I'd hear them, and they'd laugh and giggle and laugh, and then I'd laugh, and then my mother would come, why am I go to sleep, my mother would say, because she knew I was listening to what they were saying, and they're humorous. So we are happy-go-lucky, humorous people, but we're losing that because of the colonialism, and we're always afraid, what did I do wrong now? That we have to get rid of that somehow.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
That makes beautiful sense. That makes beautiful sense. At the NAC and my job here in Ottawa, I sort of have this slogan that is a sort of like, that's become the sort of slogan for the department, and sometimes even for the whole NAC, and that is, our stories are medicine. And I came up with that based on the work that we do, that our stories are medicine, that the sharing and the indigenous understanding of the meaning of medicine, not in the Western pharmaceutical or like medical tradition, but like in the indigenous medical tradition of holistic, full body, full spirit, full mind medicine. That our stories and our songs they are medicine, and that gathering is medicine. Those receiving those stories is medicine. It's good for the when you hear it, and you hear it in an audience. There's studies that have even been done for like modern theater where audience members in a theater will often breathe together and their heartbeats will align to each other, in relationship to each other, and being in these big groups and experiencing a play or music or whatever.
It's called narrative transportation. Your system aligns with whatever story is being told. And that's a big thing I think that's a huge part of our culture, was when a community tells a story together. If you've ever been to a potlatch, and there's all the songs coming in cacophony until you go to that time when the whole longhouse sings the song together, and it's a whole different level of reality. And I think when we gathering around in Lytton at the place near where Coyote's sun touched down, at the place where the two rivers are, and we gather in circle like in our ancient lodge, and all our minds are focusing on the story, and everyone's hearts are there experiencing it, telling it together, I think it activates a different part of our reality than when it's just in a book, or when you're you're thinking about it by yourself, or you find it scribbled in some tape notes somewhere. I think that's a lot of the times, I think because there's so much talk around protocol and talk about our doctrinal understanding of ceremony and it's got to be this way, instead of just picking it up and putting it into circle and bringing it to life and creating ceremony. I think we worry about what we're going to look like doing it. Whereas we put vibrations into these ancient stories, and I think it means something for those to be reverberated in that space for the first time in however many 100 something plus years. I myself believe it's part of our revitalization. I believe a lot in like blood memory, and I think that activates our blood memory, that all that memory that lives within our genetic structure. I think it's activated, and it's good for all of us, because you see people like it's just like it's a different energy than just some sideshow at the Rivers Festival. Like people walk away from there talking and walk away as community. It's great.
Yeah, I remember even just being in going into like the pub after at one point and having one of our big warriors walk up to me and go, "I was the abandoned boy." Like that was my story, and I go, "Yeah, man, I believe that." And I think they are medicine, and I'm really honored that you guys have been working with me in this way. And everybody who has been, everybody, and there's something about that too. Like we take this work of these ethnographers, who in their own context are colonial, like who are settlers, some more than others, all of them outsiders, and we as in Tlakatma taking our own stories and interpreting them in our own way for our people, like is our own humble efforts to decolonize our story and to move us forward in a good way, and based off of our own histories and beliefs and the legacy that we want to leave forward, and not the legacy that other people want to represent for us. And I think that's really great work. And I personally, I could do this work for the rest of my life, and I'll be fully satisfied. So I just want to say, Kuksjam, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation about this work. And I sure hope that we can gather again back in Klikomchin and do this work like we've been doing for the last 10 years.
Welcome, let's get it clear. What do you think you're doing? Have you all got...
Oh my goodness, Kevin, I could watch that for a lot longer than we watched it for. That was so powerful.
Oh, Cookstrom, thank you so much for having me a part of this this really great conversation that you're just starting with this very first one. So
yeah, you're my first guest. So tomorrow you and I are going to have about an hour-long conversation just about, you know, it's going to be a mix of questions that I have. I've written down quite a few, a lot of ideas or thoughts about some of the work that you're doing. Like Ronnie shared a lot of knowledge, Sharon shared a lot of knowledge, and so just really look forward to having that conversation with you to hear more. And also, you know, the people that joined us today, if you have questions that you would like to bring forward to join us for tomorrow. The main purpose of Decolonizing the Narrative conversation sessions was for us to kind of get to know different ways of thinking, different ways of being from different specific Indigenous perspectives. And I think we all work within our own mythologies. And you really explored that in the in the presentation that you offered. And you know, a lot of it aligns with the way that I work, but also learned a lot about how land and water and space has really informed and built the way that you work in your community. So I'm very, very, very excited, and so I'm grateful.
Yeah, the video that I shared they are excerpts from a longer conversation that I had with Sharon and Ron, and you can find that on the Savage Society Facebook page at savagesociety.ca, and on our website. We're building a new website, so it'll also be live on that website once it goes live, which won't be until next month. But you can find it on our Facebook page, and that conversation in total is about an hour and 45 minutes. So there are just some excerpts to get a real sense of the work that we've been doing over the years.
Incredible, incredible. So yes, we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, and bring your questions with you, and we'll connect further. So I just want to say thank you to our funders, to our donor support with RBC and Slate Foundation. And then just to say thank you all, Masi Chokweanik, for everyone that came to join us today, and Kukstem. Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing okay. How you doing?
I'm good. Where are you joining us from?
I'm here in the unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe in Ottawa.
Yeah, how's the weather?
It's warm and muggy.
I'm joining you from Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, Alberta. It's cool. It snowed a couple days ago, so it's still feeling a little chilly in the air, but Banff Centre is located on Treaty 7 territory in Stoney Nakoda, Sutuna the Dene, Blackfoot, Métis Region 3, and I always say the visiting nations of Cree territory in Tanaha and the Kootenays. So really beautiful land surrounded by mountains, a gathering place. That's quite beautiful. But I originally, well, let's start with you. Where are you? Where's your community? Where are you from?
I come from Ntlaka'pamux territory in British Columbia, territory now called British Columbia. Specifically, I come from Tecumseh, present-day Lytton, and my family comes from a place called Mekamton, which means many things.
I come from the Northwest Territories, so you know I'm a Northern girl, born and raised. My mother's Daneswuslene and Cree, and my father's Nubialwit Gwich'in, all from the Treaty 8 Wood Buffalo in the Nubialwit region. So I'm really grateful and happy to have this conversation with you today. Oh man, I needed a day to really take in that presentation and the work that you're doing with your company, Savage Society, and also all that deep work that you've been doing with the National Arts Center with Indigenous theater as well. And just really grateful that you're joining us today and that we can kind of dig in a bit. I think the first thing I want to learn more about are these wax cylinder recordings. I'm sure that people have really talked about it, but I think the big thing that I had was one, like, how did you come across them, and what inspired you to bring that to your community, to come together with your community and kind of rediscover those recordings?
Yeah, they've existed certain, with the tribal office had copies of these wax cylinder recordings. Over the years, they'd been transferred to different medium. So like, I think the first time I encountered them, they were in like cassette tapes, and then they got transferred over to DVDs or CDs, I mean. And we sort of received them when they were like CDs, and they'd gone through decades of being transferred from wax cylinders to tape to different medium over the decades since they were laid down. And these were created from various ethnographic projects from like a century ago, really. And so these are collections that are held at the National Archives in the Museum of Canadian History, and they'd sort of been, you know, dealt with there. And so when we first received them, they were actually really difficult to work with. You couldn't really hear any of the songs very well. They hadn't been cleaned up. They're very staticky and very difficult medium to work with. And then we received a batch of them that had been professionally remastered and re-cleaned up, and they cleaned up, and so you could actually hear the songs and have much better contact with the material that was laid down those hundreds of years ago by all these. I think there was three main ethnographers, Marius Barbeau is one of them, and James Tate, and I forget the name of the other fella. That were, and this is from, you know, like I said, a century ago, and these were, you know, Tate is interesting because we worked with a lot of the work that he's been doing. He was a guy who lived in our community. He immigrated in the 1800s to a place called Cook's Ferry, which we now know as Spence's Bridge. And he worked at his uncle's provision store, sort of supplying the gold rush as it was happening in the 1860s.
Wow.
And 1860s, 1880s, something like that, maybe the 1880s actually. And he ended up marrying into our tribe. He married a woman named Lucy Entco from Cook's Ferry. And they didn't have any children, but they were together for 12 years, and she ended up dying of tuberculosis or pneumonia. And anyways, in that time, he learned the language, and he and Lucy sort of were on this, you sort of worked together, I think, on this project, and she's actually recorded in a number of the songs and stuff that we have as well. But yeah, so these materials were in existence in the community for a while, and people sort of, as Ronnie mentioned in the video, like I think that there have been different projects to listen to and work with these materials over the decades as well, with different groups of elders and stuff like that. And this is sort of our version of that.
Yeah, I remember like one of the quotes that Ronnie had shared was like, pop culture. How do we take this circle of knowledge from the elders and bring it into this, and bring the stories into the youth? And I'm pretty curious about where was the impetus to bring those stories through the work that you do in Savage Society, and just how you engaged with the community to bring that in, and then how the youth kind of found themselves in the circle as well.
Yeah, it came like the beginning, or the impetus of the project sort of happened from sort of a few directions. So there was some folks who were like, hey, you should take these wax cylinders and make some songs and do a concert about them. Is one of the first provocations that we had, and I was like, oh, interesting. So we listened to them. It's like, I don't know if we should, like, it's not my expertise. Like, Ronnie's a musician, but at that time he wasn't. It was mostly just me looking at these materials. I brought him in sort of in 2013 when we did the first sort of gathering, and he was really just there as a technical support at first. But so when I was first engaging with it, I was like, well, I'm a theater artist. I'm not necessarily, like, I'm a musician to a degree, but I'm not like a professional musician. I'm a professional theater artist. And so I was looking at this material going, well, how do I respond to it? And so that was one of the sort of provocations from the community was like, hey, why don't you do something with this? And I thought, oh, okay, maybe I'll look at it. And then I did another sort of gathering at, what's it called? Anyways, we went to like a resort, and we did this sort of week-long sort of look at our spectacle stories. And spectacle, that word is a word that describes the animal human beings that existed in the myth time, in the time before time. So like beaver, coyote, spider, these beings were called spectacular. And so we call them we called the stories that we work with spectacular stories because they involve that era. And so we did a sort of a week-long look at our stories, our foundational stories, as being encoded with our laws. And this was led by Ardith Wacom, who's now on the Supreme Court, actually, who was just appointed to the Supreme Court, as an examination of like, well, how, like, the story we started with was the Battle of the Birds, and that play, that story, I mean, is about, Eagle being abusive to his wife and the community coming together to try to protect her, and him being a tyrant, he just destroys his community and is defeated eventually by the Red Hawk, who's blessed by his wife and is smart and quick and defeats Eagle. And we were looking at that story as a way of examining our traditional law. And out of that came this idea of, well, why don't we take this and make a play out of it? So
Yeah.
And when immediately it was like, okay, well, we need to not just hire a bunch of actors, we need to involve the community. And so that's really sort of in between that, that idea of like, let's take these wax cylinders and look at them for how we could use them or approach them, to looking at the stories and how could we approach that. It was like, well, what do we do with this? Like, and so the idea came to, we actually really need to bring it to the community. We need to have an examination of this work, of these cultural materials, the stories and the songs, and to have a conversation with the community about how they feel about using these to move forward at all. And so that's kind of really how it began.
That's incredible.
And the element of bringing in the children, that just evolved out of that first sort of symposium we had in 2013 was really, it was mostly adults. It was all elders and leadership and adults, and everybody was invited, and it was mostly adults. But when we went to begin to create a play in 2015, we opened it up to the community, and all these families came, and intergenerational, like little babies to great grandmas, and that's kind of just how it started. And we just got, we started playing a bunch of theater games, and we eventually built this play out of the story of the Battle of the Birds.
Amazing. And now you have 2 other stories that came from that.
4, I believe.
4.
The Words of Our Chiefs, Battle of the Birds, The Boy Who Was Abandoned, and The Council of Spider, Ant, and Fly.
Mm-hmm.
And another part of that too is there's this story that I've wanted to do. There was also sort of like another sort of reason why we created the project in the first place, was to tell the story of James Tate and Lucy Entko and Chief Tetlenitsa from Fenton's Bridge, and incorporate the community into that greater telling, and to also tell some of those stories and have some of those songs. And so I wanted to involve in that greater production, I want to involve the community as well. And so the development and the creation of this community ensemble was also with a sort of an eye to incorporating them and involving them in the story of that time, to be the community that is there at that era.
Yeah, I always find that when you work with community and you start kind of unpacking stories, that more come and more come, and then you learn more and more about the stories. When I don't know who said it in the presentation yesterday, but it was about that the stories shift and change, and that the perspective of who the teller is telling the story is as true as the story being told by someone else.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, I love that.
That's a real element of the oral storytelling tradition, is that every time a story is told by a different storyteller, that version is as valid as, as long as it sort of adheres to or comes from, the original source is credited, I guess.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of a journey about when you kind of start digging into a big work, it kind of reveals the methodology of who you are as an artist, right? Like when I started working with my grandfather's stories, and just kind of finding out who you are through the stories is quite powerful. So I tell his stories as his granddaughter, and I got to know my grandfather through the stories that he left and recorded, And then when I shared those stories within the community, I got to learn more about my grandfather in a way that I had never known, because I knew him as someone else, and I didn't know the great impact that he had. And as an art, and then that, of course, that informs the artistry. I was looking at your the mandate for your theater company, Savage Society, which started as an ad hoc and now has become quite an incredible organization that went from an ad hoc into a leadership, and now offers like incredible mentorship, and so connecting to the work that you're doing in the community with the elders and the young people, but also the people that you work with as a company, working with Ty and I think Chelsea and other artists. And how has that impacted the way that you work through Savage Society?
It's a real important part of what we do now. It started off as a company that I created just to do my own work and write grants through and platform myself, and it's evolved to this place where we're able to do to develop the work of other artists, including new and bring on onboarding new artists into the into the work as well, but also doing like we did Skyborn, which is Halemia's play, but to offer those opportunities that really weren't there to the same degree for me. I mean, they were, I was working with Marie when I was first starting out, Marie Clements, and
that's right.
Very privileged to be a part of a lot of those really wonderful productions. And I wanted to offer that, and also working with Margot, and she's really great at bringing in new people into the community. So I wanted to continue that work and to offer what we could, our capacity and our experience and our perspective, and try to create an Indigenous space when we make these works. And so it's become a really important part. Like we have, I think there's at least 7 artists now we're working with, all emerging, and trying to get there, trying to support whatever dreams and visions that they might have, and also try to incorporate them into any of the work that we're doing. So they've become a real part of the company, that aspect of mentorship and that aspect of including the new artists in the community as much as we can, because there's we need them. In order for the ecology to, like the Indigenous performing arts ecology, to really be healthy, we need as many bodies, Indigenous bodies, as we can muster into the room. And of course that often translates into art, like actors, right? Like we end up getting a lot of actors, but what we really need is like designers and people who are interested in being stage managers, and people who are interested in also in doing some of the admin stuff that is vital to working. And so we offer that as well. And a lot of the artists that we work with, we try to get them into learn how to do some producing work and writing contracts and dealing with all of the unfun, non-sexy things that have to be the nuts and bolts of a theater company.
Yeah, it's true. There, what was the ad like? There's such a history in BC. Thankfully I was able to live out there for a number of years and kind of get to know the community a little bit better and understand the roles of unceded territory. We come from self-governance, which is not, I'm not sure if it's the same term or if it's a different term, but there's 11 official languages in the north, and 9 of them are Indigenous, and so that self-governance component is quite vital, and that does feed into our stories and allows us to have that the self-determination to be able to feel confident in knowing where our culture is and that connection to land. And what I really loved in the presentation yesterday was the references to that sacred water, and that the convergence of the 2 waters, and how prominent that is in the work that you create and the stories that come from that, and then including the images of that. And it's only because Ronnie was so in that video, so I'm going to keep referencing him. But what would it be like to reclaim those spaces, and how those spaces inspire story? I think that is so when you're like you say, when you were writing, like where the blood mixes, you have that spot, you go back to your community and you have that room where you write your work, and then you where did blood mixes where the blood mixes where did that where was the impetus to create that, and where did that come from for you?
That was a really long process, that piece, and it's funny. It's like I think it was just in me. It was in my experience. I grew up at a time when our community was really struggling with the aftermath of St. George's Residential School closing down. And so in the 80s, when I was a kid, there was an enormous suicide epidemic in my community. I think we were the suicide capital of Canada at the time. And we were a community of like 2,000 people. So like you could imagine how devastating, that would be. And so and to sort of counter that, what was going on, we did a lot of education about like, at the time they used to call it residential school syndrome, where people, it was really PTSD. And so the community was just completely, and myself, like there was like we're all traumatized through that whole, not just having gone to residential school, but the aftermath, right? Like Sharon talked a lot in the video that we saw yesterday about the impact of the residential school. In the longer video, she goes even farther about the impacts and how that affects people even to this day, and how they respond to the work. That even though they have a lot of pride and they're really excited about the work they're doing, they're really shy and they don't want to come forward and say good job, because it's like that stoicism or that protection is so present. But that legacy, it has a real deep impact in my community, and I felt that as a kid. And so when I went off to go to theater school, the story that was, I have this memory of like even in a movement class, like just literally dancing out or moving out this story of surviving that. And so I wrote this thing I started writing it as Where the Blood Mixes started off as a solo show. And I wrote it, and it became, once I did the solo show piece, I wrote it to be a bigger play, and then I changed the name at one point because in the 9-year development of that play, because it had evolved so far away. But it really, the name comes from where the two rivers meet. The Inklakamuxchin meaning of Tecumchin means the place inside the heart where the blood mixes. And so, and that revelation was also like a language revelation. It's like, wow, our language is so poetic in its thinking. And even that statement, the place inside the heart where the blood mixes, is not just about like the physical, because it is about the physical. It looks like when the salmon come home up the Thompson and Fraser rivers, it's like two arteries with blood pumping.
Wow.
Like 100 years ago, right? I mean, the runs are not nearly what they used to be. Even when I was a kid, I could remember looking down the river and you'd see the salmon, you couldn't miss it, like the salmon coming home. And now it's like, you have to really look. But back 100 years ago, it was like two giant arteries just pumping fish into the interior. And it also refers to our creation story of when Coyote was destroyed by the Transformer. They got into a battle with the Transformer, and he was torn apart, and his heart landed at the place where the rivers meet. And so,
wow,
and that's all about our creation stories. And there's this other story of how Coyote is one day going to return. And I think now is the era when we're living in the era when Coyote has returned, right? Like that story as well is a part of our reality. And so, and also like when at the time when I was writing the play, I had written this poem that and then my computer crashed and I lost the poem, and I tried for like 2 years to rewrite that poem and I could never get it right. But when I rewrote the play, that poem surfaced into the play, and it became the previous play was really about alcoholism. It's what's called the Ballad of Floyd, and it was about this man struggling with his alcoholism. And then when I rewrote it to Where the Blood Mixes, that outside of the bar was really present, because that's what the poem was about. The poem was about fishing under the bridge and the sturgeon down there at the bottom looking up. And so anyway, a long-winded answer to that question, but it's complex. There's a lot of things that fed into that.
Mm-hmm. And did you know, like when it was near, I guess, you know, when you live with a story for so long, you wonder if the story will be impacted, like the way that it comes through you and then goes out there. What is that experience to kind of go like, because it's deeply impactful, Kevin. Like that's an incredible piece of theater that I've witnessed in different iterations, in like as readings, different casts in a different language, you know, with at the NAC, and it's such a resonant play for many of us, right? Because we are impacted by residential school, we are impacted by intergenerational trauma, and there's such a disconnect and broken of family cycles that come within that, and so just kind of going back, like when, like what did that feel like, I guess, in some ways for yourself? Like it's healing work is really what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I cried a lot when I was writing it. To be totally honest, there were moments where I would write something and it would be like from my guts, and it made me myself cry. But it was cathartic,
Yeah.
and it felt good to do it. But you know, there was also, I got a lot of pushback when I was writing it as well. I got a lot of people saying like, "Why do you want to write about this shit? Like, why do you want to go there? Why do you want to do that?"
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I don't see any plays out there that are telling the story. And the thing is too, it's I always think too, because everybody calls it like it's a residential school play. The play is actually more about suicide survival than it is about as much about residential school as it is about like surviving suicide, like people who have survived a loved one who has committed suicide is actually at the real heart of that play. And to try to point the finger at this legacy of the residential school as sort of the root cause of all of this trauma and misery within the community, my community in particular, and that was like this invisible demon that was devouring our people on a regular basis and continues to this day, and nobody was naming it. Like I was always like, I'm still floored by folks who go like, oh, I had no idea there was residential schools in Canada. Or you know, I remember, you know, at the Governor General's Awards, and this publisher was sitting beside said, oh, we don't have residential schools in Ontario. That was the Western thing, and all of this ignorance around the subject matter. And it always infuriated me. And as an artist, rather than just yell at people, I want to put it into the art, right? I want to talk about it and have these conversations. And I think that art is the most powerful medium to talk about really difficult subject matter. And so I, you know, it felt risky doing it because I was getting, at the time as a young artist coming out of theater school, this is the first play I'm going to write. And again, it didn't start off as a play that involved the residential school story. It started off as a play that was about this man struggling with his alcoholism. And I was sort of challenged in a workshop by Gary Farmer to, you know, and I think really what he was looking for was the second act. And he was like, so what's next? So what? But for me, the challenge made me go deeper. Where are these characters coming from and why are they there in the first place? And I wanted to get into that, and that's where we went with that, or where I went with it. And I really dug down into the root of it, and I was like, that's what it is. I want to point my finger at that invisible demon sitting in the corner, eating away at our communities, because nobody else, it felt like nobody else was, but there had been other works in the past that had done that. It's just, I hadn't encountered it in all of the, you know, venues that I was in. It wasn't a conversation that was being had. So it was really ironic that when we premiered at the Magnetic North Theatre Festival, that it was on the same day as the Apology in the House of Commons by Harper. You know,
Wow.
And so here we are in the Vancouver premiere, and that day I'm watching Stephen Harper, you know, give the apology for the residential school. And, you know, we were all just like, totally like, what the hell, right? Like it was just bizarre. The other really crazy thing about that too is that that it is that the reason that Harper apologized in the House of Commons comes from a member of my community, Terry Allen, my elder. He actually brought a court case to the government about his experience at residential school. And it was the first ever court case that challenged the government and the church about the residential school system. This was back in the late 80s, and it went through all the 90s. And they actually tried to shut him up. They tried to give him like a $300,000 check to not go forward with it. And he stuck to his gun. He said, no, I don't want your money. And he fought them all the way, and he won. And when the judge was rendering the verdict on it and figuring out what they wanted to get in reparations out of it, Terry said, I want the Prime Minister of Canada to apologize to me. And so that's what sparked this whole thing of there being an apology in the House of Commons in the first place. It was from, Terry, he was here for Mushkamo. He helped us do the blanketing ceremony. He's elder. When I grew up, he was my age, at the time, but I was doing sweats with him as a teenager. He was a real important teacher to me as a child, as a youth. And so that's a really wild 360 as well, that also comes from my community.
Wow. Wow. I was so taken. I wrote this down and I'll never forget it now. It's like when Sharon was saying that that it's the young people that are calling in the elders and welcoming them. I'd never heard that before. And I was like, whew. And so when she was saying, you young people need to welcome us back into our community because we were taken away. And I've been changed by those words. And so it's just kind of having Sharon a part of your community and having that wisdom and awareness that she's bringing, and just the strength of the voice that she speaks from is pretty incredible.
Yeah, she's got energy like there's no tomorrow. It's crazy. She's got so much energy. She's busy. She's so busy. She teaches the language. She helps people out. She's a counselor. She's so active. Yeah, and I really feel that from her, like that desire to what she's talking about is that she wants the revitalization of our culture within our youth. So that and she's talking about that gap, right? Like she was able to retain her language, but and she has so much knowledge and stuff to offer, but there's that gap that Ronnie was talking about too, that he grew up with his grandparents and was given, those cultural teachings whereas his parents weren't, right? And that gap we're trying to overcome as well.
Oh, Laurie Marchand has her. Well, oh yeah, thank you. We're being prompted to. I think Kevin and I could talk for the full hour, but this is a Q&A. So if you have questions, you can either raise your hand or you can pop them into the chat. And I can't promise to get to all of them, but we certainly can get to some of them, and we certainly can get to Laurie Marchand. Look at her.
Oh my goodness, I didn't realize that I'd done anything like raising my hand. I'm just I'm just grateful and thoroughly enjoying the stories, because so much of really my own career was was tied up in meeting Kevin and receiving one of the early drafts of the play, even before it had changed its title, and being able to do when we did the workshop of the play in conjunction with the Vancouver Playhouse at the time, we received a massive grant to do a workshop production, and it enabled us to, through a partnership with Secwepemc Cultural Education Society, to hold the rehearsals in the old residential school, now called it's been reclaimed as the Chief Louis Centre, but the elders and the Secwepemc Nation had the ability to come in and out of rehearsal you know, Kevin can speak more to the impact of doing that work in the former residential school. But you know, it'd be great to hear, Kevin, to have you talk about the experience of bringing that show back to your community.
Good question, Laurie.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Laurie is the managing director of Indigenous Theatre at the National Arts Centre, where I work. She works alongside me. We lead the department together. And she was the managing director of Western Canada Theatre when we were doing Woodwood Mixes. And so, yeah, as part of that, we did the workshop development tour. We did like 2 weeks in Kamloops, and we did it at the residential school, and that was spooky. I'm not gonna lie. I have an aunt that actually works there at the daycare as well these days. She's getting pretty old now. I'm not sure if she works there. But they've really utilized that space in that building and made it something really positive. But I'm not gonna lie, it was spooky rehearsing it there. But yeah, we did this tour through BC. We took it all over the BC interior and doing these staged readings in these various venues. And the final one was in the community hall, or the memorial hall on the reserve in Lytton. And that was, you know, probably the most terrifying presentation I ever did in my career. Was bringing that play to my community for the first time, but they loved it. And I sat behind my uncle Floyd, who the name, you know, one of the main characters of the play is named after, and he's a residential school survivor, and he loved it. You know, he was giggling the whole time, and even when it got really harsh and dark, they still really appreciated it. And you know, at the end of it, they leapt to their feet, and we had a big feast afterwards, and it was really special. Really beautiful experience. But I mean, that was also the original idea. The reason that we even went on this journey was, it was really wild. Like this, I was a playwright in residence at the Vancouver Playhouse, and at the time Glynis Lation was the artistic director, and we did a reading, and she was like, wow, this is great. We did a reading at the Playhouse, and she was like, we should get some actors, put them in a van, and go to Lytton and do this at Lytton. And so we wrote a grant to do that. We wrote a $10,000 grant to get a group of actors to go to Lytton and do it. And somebody sitting on that granting jury was like, oh, this play would be great for this new festival we're doing called Luminato. So let's do the world premiere at Luminato. And they were like, oh, okay, great. So it was like, whoa. And then all of a sudden the artistic director from Magnetic North was like, hey, we'd also like to do it. So it ended up being like going from this little reading we were going to do in Lytton to being like premiering at 2 major Canadian arts festivals in the same year. So that's kind of how it all blossomed. But yeah, it was crazy times.
Oh, amazing. And that kind of leads into the stories as medicine, you know, like when we think about stories are medicine for us because they unsilence our voices, or it unsilences our you know, what have again, I'm like, I don't even know, Ronnie, but I keep quoting him in this interview, is that like how we are allowed to bring our whole selves to be who we are fully, you know, and that our oral stories are our everyday stories. And so when we think about, you know, when being from a perspective of stories as medicine, that it allows us to bring our whole selves to these spaces, and in some ways reclaim them or just claim them, spaces that were never offered us, stories that were never offered to us. So this kind of that connector between the work you do in the community and what you do as Savage Society, and now what you're doing at the National Arts Centre as the, you know, first artistic director of Indigenous theater.
Mm-hmm.
Did you, like, clearly you never saw that path coming your way, but there you are on it.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I was sort of just doing my thing, right? Like, and I think that as the path, like there were people before us who were doing this work that we sort of were on the trail of as well, right? So there's like, you know, the Marie's and Margot and Thompson and things like that. And I think with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission coming about, the trail began to clear a bit. so that you can make it through without having to cut as much brush. And that only happened very recently. That was only like that, and that really was a result, I think, of like the public awareness opening up, just a crack, right? It's like I say, I still encounter people who have no idea, who've lived here their entire lives, or have been, many generations of their ancestors from colonization have been here and have no idea about residential schools, and so that still exists. But I think that the awareness of Indigenous issues and Indigenous people and the need to presence us in a more prominent way in terms of arts and expression and space and how we've been excluded historically through these things has helped us to really be ready to receive that, and all of those factors come into play and has allowed us to receive that and to be able to push forward in our own way. And so I'm grateful for all of that, and there's a lot of struggle in there as well. It still isn't easy, and it never was, and so I'm grateful that I'm able to live and work doing what I love to do, and to do things that I think that have a positive impact for my community and for the broader communities.
Okay, so I think I'm just going to take some of the questions here. Yes. So there's one question that came in yesterday, which it's actually a good question. It's about adaptation. And so when we think about bringing elders into, like, the knowledge of elders to the young people and then adapting. So these stories that are through the wax cylinder, and that they're teaching about elder abuse, or they're teaching about domestic violence, that were those stories that were deeply into the recordings themselves, or did you kind of adapt them into kind of a now time with the songs that you created?
No, those are actual elements of the story. The boy who was abandoned is about a boy who is abandoned, and then he finds an elder who's been neglected and abandoned as well. And the two of them, the elder and the youth, come together and they become like a powerhouse. And so that's the central part of that story. And the way in which we work, actually, the songs sort of inspire us towards when we're making songs, and like we look for the melody or the rhythm or vocables or elements of the songs that we take, and we incorporate them into new songs that we built for the shows. For example, there's a song called the Short-Tailed Mouse song we use as a song that we did in The Words of Our Chief, the second production of The Words of Our Chiefs. And the stories themselves, they have been recorded by ethnographers as like a Cole's Notes version of the stories. Really basic, just sort of this happens, and we sort of, and they're done in a way that you can receive it as a short story. But the original stories are much more epic and much more involved, and are told in the language and the syntax and all of that that's missing. And so that's the work that Ronnie's talking about, retranslating them or having them told in the language to sort of get those nuances and to try to eke out those nuances in a much more real way. But I come at it as a modern mixed blood Indigenous person from Lytton who's gone off to theater school and come back with all these like city ideas of doing a play. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so I then put my own spin on it as a storyteller. But when we did it, like, Jimmy Toodlikin, he's passed on now, bless his soul. But Jimmy Toodlikin, who sort of, you see there in the video, you sort of see him there, he's sitting there with the microphone. He was like a national treasure, that man, for our people. He was when the residential school was looking for kids, his family squirreled him away to his uncle's cabin in the bush, and they hid him his entire childhood. And they would have people come to visit him, and they would download the culture into him. So stories, songs, medicine. And so he was sort of hidden away to be like our encyclopedia, is how he described it. And so he would literally have elders and knowledge keepers come, and they would just teach him traditional ways. And so he never went to a regular school his whole life. He's illiterate, but he had all of this knowledge. He had all of our knowledge, basically.
Wow.
Sort of downloaded into him by the community. his family and by knowledge keepers and elders. And so he had the stories, he could tell the stories. Like he told, like when we did that symposium, he told the Battle of the Birds in the language. And it was amazing. And so, but when he came and seen, that same year we did a Battle of the Birds at the Talking Stick Festival, and we brought him down, or he came down to see it. And he said to me, he's like, now you're the storyteller. You tell it in your own way. And now it's your job to carry on that work. And I was like, what you do now, right? So it's like Ronnie says, like these stories survived the floods, they survived smallpox, they survived residential school, and now they're in our hands. And we can't just, it's a big responsibility. You can't just go, meh, that's cute. You know what I mean? Like there's a real sense of responsibility to try to bring them forward into the community. And I have to tell you, like the response in the community is, when the first year we did it, when we did Battle of the Birds, it was the same year that Frozen came out. And you hear those songs everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But instead of like the Frozen song, the kids were singing the Battle of the Birds songs on the playground. And the kids were playing the Battle of the Birds as a game on the playground. In the community, right? Like it had an impact, right? Like you see it, like they just ate it up and incorporated it into their play, and that's the win, right? Like you can get accolades and awards and acknowledgement all over the place, but to have that come about from the one time we only do the play once. We rehearsed it all summer and we put it up once, and that was the impact. Right, like that's how much need there is for that work.
And how was it to bring it to Talking Stick Festival, to take community to the world?
It was great. They were like, my community always surprises me, man. Like they really step up, and at first they were really shy and everything, but they were so awesome. And it was a good field trip for everybody, and had a really great time. It felt like it made it elevates everything, right? So when we were doing it in community, we didn't have any. We didn't really care so much about the aesthetic. It was more about engaging the community. But of course, now that we're putting it into the frame of a theater with lights and sound system and all these other, so I redid the masks. We rebuilt all of those masks. I painted them all myself. There's like 20 some odd masks, and we just upped the values of it and it put a different frame on it. But at the same time, the community really stepped up to that challenge and really embraced that experience in a really wonderful way, because it was, they were actors, right? They were on stage in a professional setting with the stage manager and with like all of these considerations as part of a larger festival, like all of these other Indigenous artists from all over the world. And it really just elevated them, and they felt really, really proud. And they carry that with them to this day. We had like kids, like little kids, like babies, and one of our lead characters was, played by a 7-year-old girl. That played Red Hawk, and she had to sing a song, and she's not a real singer. Those things, right? Like she's tone deaf, right? So it's like, it's still beautiful though, right? Like it still works in so many different ways.
We have a great question, and I know Casadea Marty. Casadea is one of the students that was a part of the original Powaggan that we did in Frog Lake, Alberta. And she has a question here, and it's she's in Treaty 6, and she's a young aspiring artist. She's actually very talented, who works in Forum Theatre of the Press, to promote mental wellness for my community, especially with the youth. What challenges have you experienced through your work, and how do you persevere through it?
So many challenges. Before I get into the really tough one, I'll say that one of the really beautiful things that came out of that first production as well was we were introduced to a young girl, teenager, who was identified like as soon as we started as an at-risk youth. They were really worried about her, and she was going through a really hard time. And she ended up playing. She wanted to, but she was really interested in anime, and she was really interested in acting, whatever. And so she would show up. And so when it came time to casting, I cast her as Eagle's wife, and she wanted that role so badly. And she got it. Like, she was awesome. And here's somebody, when I first met her, she wouldn't look past her toes. She always had her arms folded. She wouldn't let you couldn't touch her shoulder even. Like, you couldn't give her a hug or anything. You couldn't touch her. By the end of that play, that rehearsal process, she was like singing a song, her arms wide open. She's proud, speaking her language, like just total transformation within like 4 weeks. And there was a time in the middle of the rehearsal process where she skipped out. She didn't want to come to rehearsal. She wanted to hang out with her pals downtown. And I was like, well, she's one of the lead characters. We can't even do the rehearsal without her. So somebody went down and found her and said, you got to come to rehearsal. Kevin said, if you don't come to rehearsal, he's going to give the role to somebody else. So she showed up and she was all pissed off at me, like, you know. And then when we did the rehearsal and it came time to work, I just said, like, use that. I know you're pissed off at me right now. Use that. Take that energy and use it in the words that you have to say to me. And she just was brilliant. Like, she just came right out. And then I was like, that's really beautiful work. Thank you for showing up to rehearsal. And you could just see her, like, she got it. And it sort of clicked with her. And she was, again, like, her mood transformed. She felt good about herself. She felt like, it wasn't that I was mad. I wasn't mad at her. I was just like, well, we need you. You're needed. Like, if you're not here, we can't do this work. And there's 35 of us here waiting. You know what I mean? And we're not in like a real professional setting. It's still community, but we're all there to support. Anyways, just to say that in that 4 weeks, I've never seen a transformation so profound. She just changed. She changed into this really powerful, beautiful young woman, and so it's such an honor to witness that. But yeah, like, there's been some challenges. Like, we just lost an artist who was a real important part of all of the work we've been doing over the last number of years, Taryn Kootenay, who, you know, we lost him this year, and it still breaks my heart. It'll break my heart forever. And you just take that one day at a time. But that was something that was so out of left field and so unexpected. And all I can say is that the work is important to me and it keeps me going, but it's hard. It's really hard some days, and that one's hard. And it was a really tough one. But he was in a lot of the videos you see him, he was, you know, the boy who was abandoned, and he was in Spider and Flies, the Ant, and, you know, he was, again, one of those young artists that I really took under my wing and was really supporting his work. We're developing his play, White Noise, which we still look forward to doing in the next couple of years. And that's been a real struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Taryn came, he was one of our first participants for the Indigenous spoken word storytelling residency. Him and Ty came, and they did a lot of incredible work. And he, you know, there's videos of him just like jamming out, hanging out with everyone, doing karaoke and drumming. And yeah, there's a bright light there. I think that the challenges are, and I think you talk about that, the young girl, and even your experience at 58, my experience at Centre for Indigenous Theatre, is that we carry so much pain within us that we don't even know that it's there. And then when you start working with voice and you start working with breath, that it unlocks those memories, or it unlocks those feelings. And I'm very grateful to discover art and my voice within it. And I think it's offering that voice to young people, or offering that voice to elders, now that I've learned that elders want to be invited into the circle to work with young people. And that, you know, art has a way of bringing a connection to releasing some of that pain and allowing that pain to come through and be heard and felt. And so it's hard and uncomfortable, but I think it's really necessary.
It's a really powerful tool, you know, and as artists, I think it's something that we shouldn't shy away from. I think we should lean into it. That's why, you know, we're you know, what makes artists special is the willingness and the bravery to encounter discomfort and just encounter like those really tough moment and situation in a way that is transformative, that in a way that allows an audience to perceive it in a different way, in a way that allows for empathy to pass through and pass between us as human beings, no matter what our background. And I think that when we tell our stories, we are invoking all of that history and invoking all of that pain, but also that celebration and that resilience and that strength. And I think that often, especially in this day and age, I think that often gets overlooked, and we sort of want to shy away from the uncomfortable or silence the uncomfortable, and instead of just really going like and leaning into some of those difficult stories that we have to tell.
There was something that Sharon said yesterday that that she went to the mountains and called to the, what did she say? She called to the mountains to bring the language. What was it?
To give us back our voices.
That's right, to give us back our voices. And when I have my great aunt Lillian Elias, who's my Nuviatuk, she's our matriarch in that. She's one of the last 5 speakers of the dialect, Nuviatuk, and in our specific dialect. And she always says, I never like to think that our language is dying. I like to think that our language is sleeping. And so when I hear that, and I hear the teachings of Sharon, it's that same sense that things don't rest, that you can rely and lean into the land, and the land will reveal itself and support you. And I think how important the work, how arts play such a huge part of language reclamation or language revitalization, and that we have to hear our words in a way that we can imagine and be inspired by. And I feel like art is a really good way to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And we use the language in our plays, and we often have them spoken side by side with English as well as a translation. So most of we have this sort of narrator sort of function that'll tell us what the action is in the language, and then we translate it immediately, or we try to incorporate it as much as we can. Sure, it's a language learning tool.
Yeah. Well, you're leaving this session with all this light behind you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's just the sun is setting over here, and there's a window, so it's
gorgeous. Yeah, it looks beautiful. Well, I just want to say, Kevin, that I really appreciate you jumping and diving into my first Decolonizing the Narrative conversation sessions. And the whole point of this is to find ways to engage with the work that Indigenous art leaders are doing in the multidiscipline. So I'm just going to say that the next speakers are going to be Chris Dirksen and Lakaluk Williamson Bathory. And so they're going to talk about how the work that the music and the art that they create is, again, from that sense of how are they using a discipline to embody an Indigenous perspective and ways of knowing. And I'm just really curious about it. So just thank you so much for joining me on the journey. And I'm really, really grateful. And I got a lot out of this conversation. And yeah, just to really appreciate you taking the time. Yeah.
Yeah, quick jump. My pleasure.
Okay. Is there I should probably thank my sponsors. So I'm just going to thank RBC for supporting Indigenous Arts at Banff Centre. And I just want to thank Slate for supporting us as well. Really grateful. Without them, we wouldn't be as fortunate.
Yeah, I'll just say too, like the conversation that we shared yesterday is part of a longer video that you can find on the Savage Society Facebook page. And next month when our website launches, you can find it on there as well. And also check out the NAC Indigenous Theatre Facebook page as well, and our website for any some upcoming projects we have coming up. Like this summer we have Indigenous Cities and Dancing the Land, 2 really exciting projects that you can find more about on our Facebook page.
Yes, of course, the National Arts Center. And It is good. I didn't want to dig into that because I feel like you talk a lot about that, but this was more about like engaging story to practice. And so,
Yeah.
of course, the National Arts Centre plays a huge part in that, and the work that you're doing and the platform that you have to be able to embody and share out that knowledge is vital.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of love to you and your family.
Yeah, thank you. You too. It's great to
Thanks.
see those really cute images of Carver and Talis. Say hi to Talis for me.
I will for sure.